He's not going to make it through the night. Just let him go. That's what the technician told me, her gloved hand resting lightly on the edge of the steel exam table, as if to steady herself from the weight of what she'd said. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a sterile white glow across the animal hospital's treatment room. I remember the smell, disinfectant, wet fur, and something else, something sour and sharp that hinted at sickness. The dog lying before us was so thin he looked like bones held together by paper. His fur was patchy, clumped with dirt and dried blood, and the rise and fall of his ribs were barely perceptible. But it was his eyes that stopped me. Yellowed and crusted at the corners, yes, but still alive, still watching. I didn't know his name then. He didn't have one. He was just a stray, found collapsed behind a dumpster near the edge of town. Animal control brought him in, and the staff had already penciled his fate on the chart. PTS, severe neglect, unresponsive, possibly parvo, no ID, no owner contact. I was just supposed to confirm it. That was my job. I wasn't even a full vet yet, just a final-year student doing rotations at the county shelter hospital in rural Missouri. But that morning, I'd been sent in early to observe intake, a routine task. No decisions, no authority. Just observe. And yet, there I stood, heart pounding in my throat, looking down at this ruined creature like I had any right to say whether he lived or died. The tech, Mallory, gave me a sympathetic look, then moved to prep the next animal. But I couldn't move. "What if I take responsibility?" I said. She paused, turned. "For what?" "For him, I mean, what if I try? Give him fluids, maybe start antibiotics. Can we test for parvo? What if it's not that? Maybe he's just starving." She looked at me like I'd spoken Martian. "Are you serious? You want to try to save that dog? He's a ghost. You touch him and he'll fall apart." I didn't know what I was doing, but I couldn't look away. There was something about him, something quiet and patient in the way he endured all of it. The lights, the voices, the smells, as if he'd already seen the worst of what the world had to offer and was still willing to wait for something better. "If I can get him to lift his head, will you run the test?" Mallory snorted. "If he lifts his head, I'll name my first kid after you." I didn't respond, just reached out, so gently, and touched the side of his neck. His skin was hot, inflamed. My fingers brushed the mat of fur along his jaw, and then, miraculously, slowly, he turned his head. Not much, just a few inches, but enough to meet my eyes. Mallory blinked. "Okay, that's new." An hour later, he had an IV line in his leg, saline dripping into his veins, a heating pad under his body, and a name, Chance. It was a joke at first, a passing comment from another tech who said, "You're giving him a chance, huh?" But it stuck. I wrote it on his file. I cleaned his ears. I sat beside him on the floor during my breaks and whispered stories about my old dog, Toby, who used to chase squirrels with so much gusto he'd run face first into trees. Chance didn't move much those first few days. He mostly slept, occasionally flinching in pain if someone got too close too fast. But he didn't snap, never growled, and he kept eating. Slowly, tentatively. But he ate. I slept on the couch in the break room, to keep checking on him every 4 hours. Nobody told me to. Nobody paid me. But every time I came back into the treatment room and saw that he'd made it another hour, I felt something unlock in me, like I was discovering a version of myself I didn't know existed. By day 5, he could stand. Not for long. His legs trembled like reeds in the wind, and he'd collapse after a minute or two. But he stood. He wagged his tail once, and I swear the whole room stopped to watch. Mallory brought in a rotisserie chicken. "Just for him," she said, eyes a little wet. By the end of week 2, Chance had gained 6 pounds. His coat was still rough, and he had pressure sores on his hips from lying so long in one position. But he was alive. And more than that, he was present. His eyes followed us. He wagged his tail every time he saw me. He even licked my hand. The shelter director stopped me in the hallway. "You realize this isn't typical, right?" "I know. And you can't adopt every dog that stumbles through those doors." "I know." "Then what's your plan?" "I don't know yet." But I did. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. When I called my mom to ask if I could bring a dog home for the summer, she didn't hesitate. "Of course. You know where his bed will be, right next to the heater in the kitchen, just like Toby's." So that's where Chance went, a month later, wrapped in a towel in the passenger seat of my beat-up Corolla. I drove slow, glancing over every few minutes to make sure he was still breathing. He was. Even snored a little. That summer, my hometown in Indiana saw record heat. But Chance didn't seem to mind. He lounged in the sun like a lizard, eyes half closed, letting the breeze rustle the fur that was slowly growing back. My mom made chicken and rice for him every night. My neighbor, Mrs. Kemp, came over with squeaky toys and a hand-knit dog blanket. It wasn't all easy. He had nightmares, full-body shudders in the middle of the night. He didn't like sudden noises or raised voices, and he never barked, not once. But he followed me everywhere. If I went to the mailbox, he came. If I stood at the sink washing dishes, he lay behind me. I started calling him my little shadow. By August, he could run. Not fast, not far, but he ran, chased butterflies in the field behind the house, flopped onto the porch when he got tired, panting with a dopey smile that made my mom laugh every time. When I went back to school that fall, I brought him with me. Found a cheap rental with a backyard. My roommate Claire was skeptical at first. "Is he gonna pee all over the place?" "No, he's house-trained. Mostly." Mostly? But it only took a week for her to fall in love. One night I came home from a late shift at the clinic and found her curled up on the floor with him, both asleep, a documentary still playing on the TV. Chance became a bit of a legend around the school. Everyone wanted to know his story. Everyone wanted to pet him. And he let them. Always gentle. Always calm. Like he'd learned that love could be safe. I took him to class once for a behavioral medicine lecture. The professor asked me to share his background. When I finished, the room was silent. "And what do you think saved him?" the professor asked. "Hope," I said. "And maybe chicken." The class laughed, but I meant it. There's a kind of quiet resilience that some animals have, a softness that survives, even when everything falls away. That winter, Chance got sick again, a bad respiratory infection that left him weak and coughing. We spent Christmas at the emergency vet, curled up in a too-small room with IV lines and beeping monitors. I was terrified, but he pulled through. again. After that, I started journaling his progress more carefully. Not just weight and symptoms, but moments. The way he tilted his head when I played guitar. The time he rolled in a pile of leaves and came out looking like a scarecrow. The day he licked a toddler's face at the dog park and sent her into a fit of giggles. I didn't know I was writing the beginning of something bigger. But looking back, that first chapter, those weeks at the shelter, that drive home, those summer afternoons, it all felt like the opening of a book I never meant to write. People said he was too far gone, too sick, beyond saving. But Chance didn't believe that, and somehow, neither did I. The first time I left Chance alone for more than a few hours, he waited by the door the entire time. Claire told me he didn't eat, didn't drink, barely moved. Just sat there, nose pressed to the base of the doorframe, like he believed if he stared hard enough, I'd reappear. When I finally came back from my overnight shift, he barked for the first time. It was hoarse and short, like he surprised himself. But then his whole body started to shake with excitement, tail wagging so hard it knocked over a laundry basket. That moment stuck with me, not because of the barking, but because I realized he trusted me now. Really trusted me. And that trust came with weight. I started rearranging my class schedule, turning down weekend shifts, and budgeting more tightly so I could spend more time at home. It wasn't just about Chance anymore. Something about the rhythm of our life together made everything else clearer. I got better at school. I started cooking more. Even Claire started joining us for evening walks, which turned into a little tradition. 3 laps around the neighborhood, no phones, just stories, laughter, and the jingle of Chance's collar. But life doesn't pause just because something good is happening. Finals came, then graduation, then the scramble for job placements. I got an offer at a small private clinic in northern Colorado. Good pay, decent hours, beautiful scenery. But it meant moving. Again. Claire got into a grad program in Oregon, and by August, we were packing up boxes and measuring furniture for U-Haul trucks. I worried the change would rattle Chance. He'd come so far, but the scars weren't gone. Sometimes he'd still flinch if I dropped something. Thunderstorms sent him into the closet, and he wouldn't come out for hours. But to my surprise, he adjusted quickly to the drive. I'd borrowed a bigger car this time, one with more space in the back, and padded the whole area with pillows and blankets. We stopped every couple hours to stretch our legs. He sniffed trees in Kansas, peed in Nebraska, and snoozed his way through Wyoming. Colorado greeted us with a crisp breeze and golden grass that danced in the wind. Our new place was modest, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where kids rode scooters past picket fences and everyone waved at each other. The clinic was 10 minutes away. The house had a small yard, a creaky porch, and windows that let in warm light in the late afternoon. I didn't know it yet, but it would become the setting for some of the most meaningful chapters of my life. Chance loved it. He claimed the couch immediately, draping himself across it like royalty. Every evening after dinner, we'd sit together, me with a book, him with his head in my lap. Sometimes I read aloud, even if the stories were dry. It wasn't about the content. It was about the quiet togetherness. Work was steady. The clinic saw everything from pampered doodles with anxiety to grizzled farm dogs with porcupine quills. I found myself thinking about Chance during appointments, measuring how far he'd come against the new cases I saw each day. I started advocating harder for the tough cases, the dogs that weren't easy to love, the ones that barked too much, or growled, or flinched. I saw little bits of Chance in all of them. And then came Molly. She was a 5-year-old yellow lab mix brought in after being rescued from a hoarding situation. 27 dogs, 1 crumbling trailer, no running water. Molly had scars on her legs, a limp, and eyes that had forgotten what softness looked like. She wouldn't let anyone near her, wouldn't eat, wouldn't make a sound. The techs wrote her off as a behavioral case. "She's not adoptable," someone said. "Too broken." I didn't agree. After hours, I'd sit on the floor of her kennel, just like I had with Chance, and talk to her. Not about anything important, just about my day, the weather, the weird client who swore their cat was possessed. I brought cooked rice and chicken, put it on a plate a few feet away, then waited. By the end of week 2, she licked my hand. By the end of week 4, she came home with me as a foster. I worried how Chance would react. He'd never shared his space. But when I opened the door and let Molly sniff her way into our little living room, he stood quietly, then walked over and touched his nose to hers. Just once. Then he turned and walked toward the couch, pausing to look back like, "You coming or what?" Molly followed. That night, all 3 of us slept in the same room. Me in bed, Chance at my feet, Molly curled into the corner with a blanket. It was the most peaceful night I'd had in months. Molly's journey was slower. She'd gone longer without kindness. She had triggers I couldn't predict. Brooms terrified her. The beep of the microwave sent her trembling under the table. But she watched Chance, watched how he moved, how he trusted, and slowly, she copied him. Within 3 months, she wagged her tail when I came home. Within 5, she let neighborhood kids pet her. Within 6, I officially adopted her. People started asking me about rescue work. Friends sent me articles. Colleagues asked if I'd speak at local events. I didn't feel like I'd done anything special. I'd just listened, waited, offered a steady presence. But I started to understand how rare that could be for animals like Chance and Molly. One spring morning, I woke up to find both dogs staring at me from the foot of the bed, tails thumping, eyes bright. "All right," I said. "What do you want?" They wanted a hike. I packed water, treats, a few bandages just in case, and we headed for the trails west of town. The sun was just starting to warm the edges of the earth, casting long shadows across the grass. Chance walked beside me, Molly a few feet ahead, her nose twitching with every new scent. We reached a ridge that overlooked the valley, and I sat down on a flat rock while they sniffed and explored. It hit me then how far we'd come. From a shelter basement and a trash-strewn alley to this moment of pure peace. The wind tugged at my sleeves. A hawk circled high above. I closed my eyes and listened. I thought about starting a rescue organization. Not big, just local, focused on the hard cases, the ones who needed more time, more patience. I talked to the clinic owner who offered to donate supplies. Claire, still in Oregon, connected me with a professor who specialized in animal behavior. I filed paperwork, built a website, and launched a foster network from my living room. We called it Second Light Rescue. The name came from a phrase I'd scribbled in my journal after that first week with Chance. Some lights go out, others just wait to be seen. Chance became our unofficial mascot. His photo, taken mid-yawn on the porch, was on our flyers. He came with me to adoption events, wearing a little bandana with our logo. People gravitated to him. Kids curled into his side like he was a living pillow. Elderly folks patted his head and told him he had wise eyes. We took in 8 dogs that first year, then 15, then 30. Not all made it. That was the hardest part. But many did. And for every one that found a home, I'd light a candle and write a little note in the notebook I kept by my bed. Chance was aging, slowly, gracefully. His muzzle turned silver. His steps grew cautious. He slept more, ate slower, didn't chase bugs the way he used to. But he still greeted me at the door, still waited by the window when I went to the clinic, still curled beside me at night with a sigh that said, "All is well." Then came Leo. He was a brindle pit mix, found in a crate on the side of the interstate. Emaciated, missing patches of fur, eyes dull. The kind of case that makes your stomach twist. I brought him home the day before a snowstorm. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't move, just lay on the floor, muscles locked tight. That night, I placed him on a thick blanket near the fireplace and sat beside him. Chance watched from his spot by the couch, then got up, slowly, joints stiff, and came to lie beside Leo. No sniffing, no nudging, just quiet presence. Leo didn't react at first, but over the next few days, he began to shift. Lift his head, follow me with his eyes. He'd flinch if touched, but never growled, never bit. And after a week, he licked Chance's ear. It was like passing a torch. That winter was long. Cold seeped into the corners of the house, and I kept extra blankets in every room. Chance slept more than ever, sometimes for whole afternoons. But he never stopped watching the others, watching me. By spring, Leo had doubled in weight. His coat grew thick and glossy. He ran like the wind and barked like it was his job. He got adopted by a family with 3 kids and a trampoline in the backyard. I cried when they drove away. Chance sat beside me, calm and still. The rescue kept growing. Volunteers came. Donations trickled in. We hosted training workshops, partnered with shelters, taught classes at the high school. I hired a part-time assistant to help with paperwork. My mom visited and spent entire weekends cooking dog meals in bulk. One afternoon, I sat on the porch with Chance, a cup of tea in my hands, the sun warming my legs. Molly was dozing beside the steps. Birds chirped in the distance. "You did this," I whispered to him. "All of this started with you." He blinked slowly, his tail thumping once against the wood. There was more to come. I knew that. More dogs, more healing, more nights on the floor with frightened creatures who just needed time. But for now, in that quiet sliver of sunlight, everything felt whole. Chance had been called too sick to save. But he saved me, and in his quiet way, he kept saving others too. I didn't know what the next chapter would bring, but I knew who would be at the heart of it. My little shadow, my once broken boy, my Chance. The first day of summer brought heat that shimmered off the pavement like waves. The mornings in Colorado had always been crisp, even in June, but this day rolled in thick and quiet. I opened the windows early, trying to catch what breeze I could, and Chance wandered to his usual spot by the door, stretching his legs with the kind of slow, thoughtful movement that came with age. Molly followed, always a step behind him, as though her days still orbited his. He'd been slower lately. The silver in his face had spread down his chest, and his legs didn't move the way they used to. But he still insisted on our morning routine. Out to the mailbox, then a stroll along the back fence to sniff the pine trees. He paused at every one, tail lifting just a little, and I could see the memories flicker behind his eyes. Leo rolling in the snow, Molly darting through weeds, the way he used to leap like a deer when he heard the treat jar rattle. The rescue had doubled in size. We'd partnered with 3 local shelters, rotating intakes every month. Our team had grown to 8 regular volunteers and 2 full-time fosters. I'd converted the garage into a secondary care space, kennels on one side, supply shelves on the other, a portable heater for winter, and fans in the summer. My living room was no longer a living room. It was a rotating door of recovery. Blankets, toys, chewed slippers, bowls, paperwork, and always Chance. He was the constant. Every dog that came through learned from him. The nervous ones watched him and crept closer. The loud ones slowed their barks in his presence. Even the puppies, wild and chaotic, gravitated to him with the unspoken understanding that this was someone worth trusting. One morning, we took in a dog named Harper. She was a black and tan coonhound, barely a year old, pulled from a cruelty case in the next county over. Her ears were torn, one leg crooked from an old break, and she had the kind of eyes that never blinked too long. She didn't know what to make of people. She didn't cower, but she didn't lean in either, just stared like she was waiting for a trick. She growled the first time I offered food. Just a low rumble. I didn't take it personally. I set the bowl down and backed away. It took her an hour, but she ate. Then watched me again, bowl empty. That night, I brought her into the living room, leash still on, and let her sit in the far corner. Chance was stretched out on his bed, snoring. Molly sniffed Harper once, then plopped down under the window, indifferent. It was Chance Harper watched. Watched the way he didn't move when I passed near him. Watched how he leaned into my hand when I scratched his shoulder. By the end of the week, she sat 10 feet closer. By the end of the second, she licked his ear. Every time it was like watching the same miracle unfold. There was a quiet night in July when I sat outside with Chance long after the sun had dipped behind the mountains. The stars above our town seemed to hang lower in the summer, like you could just reach up and stir them. The air smelled like pine and cut grass, and the faintest hint of something warm from a grill 2 houses over. Chance lay beside me on the porch, his breath slow and even. I sipped iced tea and thought about the years since I'd first met him. So much had changed, and yet he was still here. My beginning. "We should write a book," I said aloud, voice barely above a whisper. His ears twitched, just barely. "About you, about all of them, the ones people gave up on." I started writing the next morning, just a few pages. Memories, mostly. The stories behind every adoption, the first tail wag, the first step toward trust. I typed late at night after the last of the dogs had settled, Chance curled beside me on the couch. I wasn't trying to publish it. Not then. I just wanted to document it all, hold on to it, in case the details ever began to blur. By August, Harper had made incredible progress. She now slept belly up on the couch, a complete 180 from the rigid, suspicious creature she had been. She adored water and would leap into the kiddie pool I kept in the yard any time I turned on the hose. Her tail wagged at every greeting. She'd still flinch at sharp noises, but she'd shake it off quicker now. I had a list of interested adopters, but none felt right. Then came the Smiths, a quiet couple in their 60s who lived on a blueberry farm outside of town. They'd lost their last dog to old age 6 months prior, and had waited until the grief settled into memory before looking again. They met Harper at one of our open yard days and sat with her on the grass for nearly 2 hours. Said nothing. Didn't push. Just waited. She came to them slowly, sat between them, licked the man's wrist. I sent her home with them 2 weeks later. Chance watched her leave from the front steps. Harper glanced back once. I waved. Chance lay down and sighed. Not sad, just peaceful. Life followed that rhythm for a while. Dogs in, dogs out. Some stayed longer. Some healed fast. I met people I never would have known otherwise. Retired folks looking for companionship. Teenagers volunteering for credit hours who ended up staying long after graduation. Even a few veterans who found solace in fostering. One man named Rick came every Tuesday without fail. He never said much. Just brushed the dogs, cleaned bowls, checked the gates. I found out later he'd lost his son in the service and hadn't been able to speak about it since. One day, Chance walked up to him, pressed his head into Rick's leg, and stayed there for nearly an hour. Rick cried, just sat on the ground with his arms around Chance and cried. After that, he never missed a week. Chance slowed more as the summer waned. I added rugs to the hardwood so he could walk without slipping. Put his bed closer to the door so he wouldn't have to move far to get outside. He still insisted on standing when I came home. Still wagged. But I could see it. The heaviness. The effort. I started planning a celebration. Not a birthday. We didn't know when he was born. Not exactly an anniversary either. Just a gathering. To thank him. To honor him. We held it in the backyard on the first Sunday of September. Mild weather. Tables set up with photos of every dog we'd helped. Polaroids. Before and afters. Stories clipped to clothespins. The turnout was bigger than I expected. Families, adopters, neighbors, donors. Kids played on the grass while adults shared memories and paper plates of sandwiches. Chance wore a new collar for the occasion, navy blue with brass stars. He sat under the shade of the maple tree while people came to say hello, one after another. Some knelt beside him, others sat cross-legged nearby. He accepted every touch with his usual patience. Someone brought a cake. Another brought a sign that said, "The dog who started it all." That night, I carried him inside. He was too tired to walk. I placed him gently on the couch, kissed the top of his head, and turned off the porch light. September passed gently. Gold crept into the leaves, and the air turned crisp again. I found myself pausing more often, watching Chance nap in the sunlight, listening to his soft snoring. I began to think about legacy, about what it meant to leave something behind that could keep growing, even after we were gone. That's when I decided to turn the journal into a real book. I reached out to a small publisher who specialized in animal stories and nonprofit memoirs. They were interested. I sent sample chapters, photos, statistics. They wanted to meet Chance. The editor arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a woman named Helen with silver hair and a voice like gravel. She crouched beside Chance and rubbed his ears, smiling. "He's everything you said he was." "More," I said. She nodded. "Let's make sure people know it." The book deal was modest, enough to fund some of our expansion plans, enough to put aside something for long-term support. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted people to know his story. Because every time someone saw him and said, "He's so calm," or "What a sweet old boy," I wanted them to understand the road it took to get there. I wanted them to believe in second chances, in third and fourth ones too. October rolled in with wind and early frost. I bought Chance a new sweater. gray with a red stripe. He didn't love wearing clothes, but he tolerated it, especially when it meant staying outside longer without shivering. He loved autumn. The smells, the sounds of leaves crunching, the way the world felt quieter. I did too. We received a call from a shelter in a nearby county about a case involving 7 dogs from a single home. Malnourished, neglected, matted fur, infected wounds. I coordinated with my volunteers to prep the intake space. Blankets, antibiotics, soft food. One of them, a young mutt named Nellie, had the same eyes Chance once had. Hollow, tired, unsure. She was rail-thin and so covered in fleas we had to treat her twice before bathing. She flinched at voices, but not at Chance. He sat beside her the first night, his body like a quiet anchor. By the end of the week, she followed him everywhere. Another miracle repeating. I'd long stopped believing in coincidences. These dogs came when they did for a reason. We crossed paths exactly when we were supposed to. And Chance, he was the beacon that drew them in. The colder it got, the more I found myself holding on to the moments. I took more photos, wrote more notes, sat longer on the porch, even if the wind bit at my cheeks. Because the more time passed, the more I could feel the shift, the gentle winding down. But we weren't done. Not yet. There was still another dog to help, another family to meet, another night of lying beside a trembling body, whispering promises of safety. And Chance would be there, as he always had been. Quiet. Steady. A living reminder that love, even when broken, can mend more than one life at a time. November crept in with gray skies and wind that shook the porch swing like a warning. The trees had already dropped most of their leaves, scattering crisp, brown edges across the yard where Chance used to chase grasshoppers. He didn't run like that anymore, not even close, but he still tried to follow Molly as she bounded through the piles, tail whipping, nose to the ground. He'd take a few steps, pause, then settle on the nearest patch of sun, watching with contentment that seemed to stretch back through all his years. Inside the house, Nellie had claimed the couch as her domain. She curled into a tight ball in the corner, tail draped over her nose, and only moved when the food bowl was filled, or when Chance came by to check on her. She loved him. More than that, she depended on him. She'd stopped trembling. She'd started making eye contact. She even barked once at the mailman, then stared at the sound like it had come from someone else. I began training new volunteers that month. The rescue had grown too large for me to manage alone. We had a wait list of incoming dogs, and my inbox overflowed with questions, applications, donation offers. I created intake protocols, feeding schedules, temperament assessments, but no document could replace what Chance offered. Every dog that came through, no matter how broken or defensive, softened in his presence. He was the calm they had never known. He was the lesson none of us could teach. I remember one afternoon, a bitterly cold Tuesday. I was trimming nails in the garage when a car pulled up. A woman stepped out, holding a cardboard box close to her chest. Her eyes were red, her cheeks blotchy. She didn't say much, just opened the box and held it toward me. Inside was a tiny pup, no more than 6 weeks old, shivering and covered in flea dirt. His ribs were visible through thin fur, and his eyes were sealed shut from infection. "Found him behind a gas station," the woman whispered. "I can't keep him. I'm sorry." I took the box and told her it was okay, that he'd be warm now, safe. She left without another word. We named him Finch, He was the youngest we'd taken in that year, too young to be away from his mother. He couldn't stand properly and cried when left alone, high, pitiful sounds that echoed through the hallway at night. I placed a small heating pad under his blanket and sat beside him as he whimpered, singing quietly, anything to keep him from fading. Chance laid nearby, head resting on his paws. He didn't get too close, just close enough. Finch's cries settled after a while, not gone completely, but quieter, like he sensed something larger, something older, standing watch. Those nights became routine, feedings every 3 hours, cleaning his eyes, holding him against my chest as he shook. I hadn't expected a newborn during winter, but somehow Finch brought new life into the house. His energy, fragile as it was, reminded me why we did this, why it mattered. Chance's steps had slowed to a crawl. He slept more deeply now. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night, heart hammering, afraid he'd stopped breathing. But then he'd shift slightly or sigh, and I'd exhale too. The vet visits became more frequent, not emergencies, just check-ins. We monitored his kidneys, his heart, his joints. Nothing acute, just age, the gradual unraveling that no medicine could reverse. But he was happy, comfortable, still curious, still present. One morning, I found Finch curled up next to him. Not near him, next to him, their bodies touching. Chance didn't stir. Finch slept with one paw over his nose, mimicking the same posture I'd seen from Nellie weeks earlier. It was like watching a thread weave itself through every soul in that house. I called my mother later that day, told her about Finch, about Nellie's progress, about how Chance had become a mentor to everyone, even if he never moved much anymore. She said, "It sounds like he's doing exactly what he was meant to do." The book manuscript was done by then. Helen had gone through 2 rounds of edits with me, careful not to lose the spirit of the story. We finalized the cover art, a photo of Chance from behind, walking across the field with Molly just a few paces behind. The publisher loved it, said it told the whole story without a single word. Pre-orders began trickling in. We set up a small signing event at the library in town. I almost canceled. I didn't like being the center of attention, but the community had given so much to the rescue. I owed them this moment. That Saturday morning, I packed a folding table, a stack of books, a marker, and of course, Chance's favorite blanket. We set up near the fireplace inside the library, where a few chairs had been arranged into a makeshift audience. Molly curled at my feet. Chance sat beside me, wrapped in the blanket, eyes half closed, but alert. People came. Some I knew, some I didn't. They asked questions, shared stories about their own dogs, cried when I mentioned the first time Chance looked me in the eye at the shelter. And Chance, he let every person stroke his head, kiss his snout, lean close and whisper thank you. He soaked in every word like sunlight. A little girl brought a drawing. It was crude, stick figures and scribbled trees, but there was a big dog in the middle, wearing a blue collar with yellow stars. She handed it to me, shy and proud. "That's your dog," she said. "He's magic." "He is," I whispered back. I pinned the drawing on the wall in our intake room, above the sink, so every time I filled a water bowl, I could look up and remember what she said. The first snow came early in December, just a dusting, but enough to blanket the porch and muffle the sounds of the town. Chance didn't rush outside anymore, but that morning, he paused at the open door and sniffed the air with interest. I watched him step out slowly, feeling each inch of wood under his paws. He stood in the yard for a long time, snowflakes catching in his fur, head tilted toward the sky. Molly danced around him, barking joyfully. Nellie barked too, still awkward but trying. Finch bounded out with his short legs, stumbled in the snow, then barked just because everyone else did. That evening, we built a fire. I set up all the dog beds in a half circle around it. Chance in the middle, his blanket folded just right. I laid down beside him, watching the flames. "You know," I said, "when I started this, I thought I was saving one dog, just you. But you've given me an entire world." His ear twitched. He shifted slightly, his head settling against my chest. I felt his heartbeat. Slow, steady, still here. Christmas was simple. I didn't travel that year. Instead, I made stockings for each dog, cheap felt ones from the dollar store, filled with treats and squeaky toys. The morning was loud and chaotic. Finch shredded his in under 5 minutes. Molly carried hers around like a prize. Nellie just stared at hers until I pulled the treats out and set them beside her. Chance didn't care about the stocking, but he let me put a red bow on his collar, and he sat beside the tree as I snapped a photo. It turned out blurry, but it's still my favorite. The rescue went quiet in the last week of December. Most dogs had been adopted before the holidays. Only 3 remained: Molly, Nellie, and Finch. We had space, time. I finally cleaned out the filing cabinet I'd been avoiding for months, organized the medication drawer, repainted the back door. I also wrote a letter. Not to anyone in particular. Just a letter about what I'd learned. About patience, about grace, about how sometimes the most broken things teach us the most. I left it in a notebook on the kitchen counter. Not because I was planning anything, just because I needed to say it. New Year's Eve arrived with little fanfare. I made soup, fed the dogs early, sat on the porch as fireworks cracked faintly in the distance. Chance was beside me as always, Molly curled against his side, the others inside, already asleep. I looked out at the yard, the path lit faintly by the porch light, the shadows of trees stretching across the snow. "We've come a long way," I said. And we had. But we weren't done. Not yet. I stood, stretched, helped Chance back inside and closed the door against the cold. Another year was about to begin, and with it, more dogs, more stories, more quiet nights with ears twitching and eyes watching and hearts learning to feel safe again. Chance yawned, shuffled to his bed, circled once and lay down with a soft huff. I turned off the lights and sat beside him until sleep pulled me under too. The first morning of the new year arrived with sun spilling over the horizon in wide golden bands. It bathed the kitchen floor in soft light, illuminating the bowls already laid out in a neat row, each filled with warm food and a little extra chicken I'd saved from the night before. Finch was the first to arrive, skidding around the corner with his ears flapping, paws too big for his own sense of balance. He barked once, sharp and enthusiastic, then pounced on his meal like he hadn't eaten in days. Molly followed, a little more dignified, tail wagging in slow arcs. She waited for me to pat her side before lowering her head to eat. Nellie trailed last, as always. She didn't like rushing. She sniffed her bowl, glanced up at me for confirmation, then started with slow, deliberate bites. Chance didn't come into the kitchen right away. He had started taking longer to get up in the mornings. I didn't rush him. I walked back to the bedroom and found him still curled on his bed, his nose tucked under one paw. His eyes blinked open slowly when he heard my footsteps, and I knelt beside him, running a hand down his back. "Morning, old man. You ready to start the year?" He lifted his head a little and stretched his legs out, joints creaking faintly. I waited as he got up in his own time, his movements careful and slow, like every step needed a moment of thought. But he made it to the kitchen, and the others moved aside without needing to be told. They knew. He ate half his food. That was enough for now. I refilled the water bowls, checked the calendar, and opened the back door to let them into the yard. The cold slapped me in the face, sharp and dry, but the sky was blue, and the snow had crusted over in a way that made it sparkle. The yard was alive with motion. Finch darted toward the fence line, tail wagging. Molly trotted after him, her bark sharp and playful. Nellie stayed near the porch, sniffing the steps. Chance stepped out carefully, pausing as he always did, and moved slowly toward his usual sunny spot near the maple tree. That day, I had a meeting scheduled with a local contractor. We'd received a grant from a regional foundation just before the holidays, enough to build an enclosed recovery space for winter months. Heated floors, better insulation, soundproofing to help the noise-sensitive dogs. The contractor, a soft-spoken man named Peter, met me at the side of the house. He wore a beanie pulled low over his forehead and carried a tablet with drawings. "I figured you'd want to maximize natural light," he said. "You've got a great line of sun on this side, especially in the morning." "That's where Chance likes to nap," I told him. Peter looked over. Chance was lying in the patch of sun, his body still, eyes half closed. "That him?" "That's him." Peter nodded. "We'll make sure his spot stays warm." It took the rest of the morning to finalize the layout. We walked the perimeter, discussed insulation options, measured twice. I could already picture it. A quiet, clean space with low lighting and soft music playing, each dog recovering in their own little sanctuary. The noise of construction wouldn't start for another few weeks, but the anticipation energized me. I ordered new supplies, updated our donor newsletter, added a small wish list to the website, mostly toys and fleece blankets. That weekend, a woman named Carrie visited the rescue. She'd recently lost her terrier mix and was hoping to adopt again. She had soft eyes, a quiet voice, and wore her grief like an extra layer beneath her jacket. I introduced her to Molly and Finch, who both responded well. But it was Nellie who surprised me. She approached Carrie slowly, then sat beside her and laid her head on her knee. Carrie teared up almost immediately, brushing her fingers gently along Nellie's ears. "She's so gentle," Carrie whispered. "She's come a long way," I said. They spent 2 hours together in the living room. By the end of the visit, Carrie had filled out the paperwork. Nellie went home the following Tuesday. I packed her favorite toy and a blanket that smelled like the rest of us. As Carrie buckled her into the car, I leaned down and kissed the top of her head. "You're safe now," I whispered. Chance stood at the window and watched the car drive away. That evening, the house felt quieter than usual. Not empty, just quieter. Molly paced a bit. Finch barked at shadows, maybe a little confused by the change, but Chance settled easily, head resting on my foot as I sat cross-legged on the floor. The next few weeks passed in that gentle rhythm. Mornings filled with barking, meals, quick vet visits, afternoons filled with applications, walkthroughs, paperwork. The sun shifted higher in the sky each day, a hint that winter wouldn't last forever. One particularly bright afternoon, I sat on the porch with a clipboard and a cup of tea. Chance lay beside me, his blanket folded beneath his chest. He had started to sleep more heavily in recent days, but he still made time to sit in the sun. Finch bounded out of the house, spotted a squirrel, and launched into pursuit. He didn't stand a chance, but he tried anyway, skidding through snow and yipping excitedly. "You were like that once," I told Chance. His eyes didn't open, but I saw the twitch of his tail. A letter arrived the next day from a woman in Kansas. She'd read an early copy of the book and wanted to thank me. Her dog had died 6 months ago, and she hadn't been able to talk about it until now. She included a photo of a shaggy black mutt and a short note. He looked at me like I was the only person on earth. I never thought I could deserve that. I kept the letter. I kept all of them. A week later, the contractor started work on the new building. Chance watched from the window, head on his paws, eyes following the movement of tools and lumber. I brought him outside when the hammering stopped for the day. He sniffed the edges of the foundation, then walked slowly to his maple tree and lay down. Peter waved at him. "Still watching over everything, huh?" "Always," I said. February brought cold snaps that cut through even the thickest coats. I wrapped Chance in an extra sweater and moved his bed closer to the fireplace. He seemed to like the sound of the crackling wood. Sometimes his ears would twitch, as if the fire was telling him stories. Molly had taken on a bit of Chance's role, in her own way. She no longer hesitated when new dogs arrived. She would trot over, sniff politely, then settle nearby. She didn't cuddle like he did, but she offered proximity. And that was enough. I hadn't realized how much she'd learned from him until we took in a pair of bonded siblings, 2 terrier mixes from a neglect case. They were nervous, barky, prone to hiding. But Molly lay in the center of the room and ignored their noise. Eventually, they stopped barking. They watched her. And by the 3rd day, they were sleeping beside her. It was happening again, the passing of calm, the ripple of peace. Chance wasn't in the middle of the chaos anymore. But his presence still shaped the house. His influence had soaked into the floorboards, the walls, the quiet moments between each bark. I wrote more that month, journal entries mostly, observations, lists of names, traits, favorite snacks. I wanted to remember all of it, not just the big milestones, but the small ones too. The first tail wag, the hesitant paw on my leg, the way a dog would sigh when they realized they could finally sleep without fear. Chance had started to need help getting onto the couch. He didn't resist. He waited for me to lift him gently, then settled with his head on the pillow, breathing slow and deep. He still perked up at the sound of the treat jar. He still followed me with his eyes when I crossed the room. There was a morning late in February when the snow finally began to melt. The trees were still bare, but the wind had softened. The air smelled different. Fresher, lighter. I opened the front door, and Finch burst outside like he'd been fired from a cannon. Molly followed, slower. Chance stood beside me, looking out. "Come on," I said. I didn't rush him. I waited. He stepped out, paws landing carefully on the cold wood. I held the door open and followed him, walking slowly beside him toward the edge of the porch. He stopped there and looked out at the yard, at the maple tree, the grass still hidden beneath a patchy crust of snow, the squirrel feeder swinging lightly in the breeze. He closed his eyes and lifted his nose to the air. And for a moment, I swear I could see the entire journey behind us. The alley where he was found, the shelter exam table, the drive home with the windows down, the first tail wag, the first bark, the dogs who followed him. the people who changed their lives because of him. All of it was there, wrapped into this single moment. Then he turned, walked back inside, and curled up on his bed. That afternoon, I brought in 2 new intakes, a beagle named Arthur and a shepherd mix named May. Both were wary, stiff, unsure. I gave them time, quiet, space. And as the sun dipped low, I sat beside Chance and told him all about them. He listened, as he always had. There would be more stories, more work to do, more lives to rebuild. And Chance, he was still at the center of it all, reminding us, without words, what it meant to love something back to life. March arrived not with a dramatic thaw, but with the kind of slow, creeping warmth that made you second-guess whether winter was truly gone. The snow didn't melt all at once. Instead, it receded in quiet stages, first from the rooftops, then from the sidewalks, then finally from the stubborn patches beneath the trees. The mornings were still cold, but the afternoons hinted at something softer, something alive. The rescue was at full capacity, 8 dogs total, a mix of breeds, ages, and stories. Some had come from nearby counties, some from farther out, brought in by small shelters who knew we specialized in the difficult ones. We had Arthur and May, still nervous but learning fast. There was Sophie, a blind collie mix with a nervous tail and a heart of gold. And then there was Boots, a scrappy mutt with fur like steel wool and eyes that watched everything. Boots had been seized from a backyard breeder situation. He was about 3 years old, half-starved, and deeply distrustful of men. He didn't snap, but he growled often, low and long. His entire posture was a question. Are you going to hurt me or just ignore me? I didn't push him. I gave him space. I sat on the floor with a book and let him sniff the air between us. The first time he touched my hand with his nose, it felt like an offering. Small, fragile. Chance hadn't interacted much with the new group yet. He was resting more. Sometimes he'd sleep through the noise of feeding time or not stir when someone knocked on the door. But he still made his rounds. One slow loop through the house every morning. A walk to the back door in the afternoon. A soft sigh as he settled down beside me each night. The new recovery building was almost done. The floors had been laid. The insulation finished. We were just waiting on the final wiring for the heating panels. Peter gave me a thumbs up after his morning check-in, and I stood in the doorway for a long while, picturing the dogs that would one day lie in those corners, the warmth that would wrap around them like safety made tangible. I brought Chance inside the new space that evening. I carried him in my arms, wrapped in his favorite blanket. The air inside was quiet, still. He lifted his head and looked around, blinking slowly. I sat with him on the floor and told him about our plans, about the dogs we'd help here, the volunteers who would sit on these same floors, the stories that would begin in this space. His eyes met mine and something passed between us. Not a memory, not a goodbye, just a knowing. That night, I got a call from a local vet clinic about an elderly boxer who'd been surrendered by a family moving out of state. His name was Murphy. He had arthritis, cataracts, and a heart murmur. He needed a place to rest, maybe for a few weeks, maybe longer. I said yes. Murphy arrived the next morning. He was slow, quiet, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and old blankets. But he was gentle. He accepted my touch without flinching. When he met Chance, he paused, then sat down right beside him. They didn't interact much beyond that. Just sat, silent, but not alone. I updated the intake chart, added Murphy's name to the feeding schedule, and watched as the energy in the house shifted slightly. It wasn't sad. It wasn't heavy. It just felt older, wiser. That afternoon, I brought out a box of old photographs. Some were printed from my phone, others were actual Polaroids. There were images of every dog who'd come through our doors. Some stayed for weeks, some for months. All of them had left something behind. I laid them out on the kitchen table. Finch jumped up to try and steal one. Molly barked and herded him off like a bossy older sister. I smiled and started organizing the photos by year. I came across the very first one I'd taken of Chance. It was blurry, taken with shaking hands in the shelter intake room. He looked skeletal, his eyes dull. But even then, he was looking right at me. I placed that photo in a frame and set it on the mantel. The following day, a woman named Elena came by the rescue. She'd been through a rough few years: divorce, a job layoff, the loss of her father. She wanted to foster but wasn't sure if she could handle the responsibility. I walked her through the basics, introduced her to Boots, who immediately growled, then circled back and sniffed her coat. "He doesn't usually do that so fast," I told her. "I think he sees something in me," she said quietly. We sat on the floor, Boots watching us with his usual suspicion. I told her about Chance, about how he'd taught me to wait, to not expect affection, just to offer it. Elena left with Boots that afternoon. I gave her a week's worth of supplies and my number on a note card. She called 3 days later to say he'd started sleeping on the rug by her bed. "He watches me while I read," she said, "like he's trying to memorize my voice." Spring continued its slow arrival. Crocuses poked their heads through the last patches of snow. The birds returned. The yard thawed into mud and then into soft grass. The days stretched longer. Chance still made it outside every morning. I'd help him down the steps and he'd pause halfway through the yard to rest. Finch always circled him a few times before bolting toward whatever he imagined was moving in the bushes. Molly had taken to napping in the hallway, where she could see both the front door and the kitchen. Her watchful nature had only deepened with time. She didn't bark much anymore, but when she did, it carried weight. One evening, after dinner and chores, I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and a dog on either side. The lights were low, the room quiet. I read aloud from a book I'd been meaning to finish. I didn't expect anyone to care, but as I read, the dogs settled closer. Even Murphy dragged himself in and curled nearby. Chance lay with his head on his paws, eyes half closed. I read until my voice grew hoarse, then set the book aside and just sat in the stillness. These were the moments that stitched life together. Not the milestones, not the celebrations, but the quiet in-between spaces where nothing needed to be said. The next weekend, we hosted a spring open house. Flyers went out. Cookies were baked. Volunteers set up folding chairs and hung string lights across the new recovery building. The space wasn't officially in use yet, but I wanted people to see it, to feel what it would become. Families came. Kids ran across the grass. Adopters returned with now-grown dogs, all healthy and gleaming. There were hugs, stories, shared laughter. One woman brought a scrapbook of her dog's journey. Another brought a donation in her late husband's name. Chance lay in his wagon, bundled in his blanket, wheels parked beneath the tree. People came to see him, kneeling beside the wagon like it was sacred. They touched his fur, told him thank you, pressed photos of their dogs into my hand, with tears in their eyes. As dusk fell, I wheeled him back inside. He rested his chin on the edge of the blanket and looked at me the entire way. "I hope you know what you've done," I whispered. "What you're still doing." He blinked once. The night ended quietly. Everyone left with full hearts. The lights came down. The yard emptied. Inside, the house was warm and full. Dogs snored in every corner. The scent of lavender from the diffuser hung in the air. I stood in the doorway for a long time and watched it all. Everything we'd built. Everything he'd made possible. And then I turned off the light and joined him on the floor, just like always. We weren't finished. There was still more to do, still more to save, still more love to give. And chance, even in rest, remained the heart of it all. April opened with a warm rain that softened the ground and turned the grass from faded straw to something almost luminous. The scent of wet earth drifted through the open windows as I laid down new bedding in the intake room. The rain tapped gently against the roof while the dogs shuffled nearby. Boots, now a regular visitor again since Elena had decided to volunteer full-time. Sophie, who had learned to navigate the house with impressive confidence. And Murphy, who had taken to snoring like a freight train in the hallway by noon each day. Chance had slowed even further. His days were quieter now, his steps more cautious, his naps longer. He had trouble standing without help, and sometimes he needed to be carried outside, which he accepted with an air of quiet dignity. He still watched the younger dogs, still seemed to read the mood of the house. If one of them was nervous or pacing, it was Chance they sought out. Even without moving, his presence calmed them. A glance in his direction, a brush against his shoulder, seemed to say, "You're safe here." I found myself rearranging my schedule, carving out more time to simply be with him. Mornings were our moments. The others would rush out into the yard, chasing smells and sounds. But Chance and I would sit on the porch with a blanket over our laps. He no longer barked. He didn't need to. His eyes held everything he wanted to say. One Sunday, I brought out a basket of supplies, brushes, towels, an old bottle of lavender shampoo, and gave him a bath right there on the porch. The sun was warm, the breeze gentle. He didn't squirm or flinch, just let me wash the thin fur along his back, rinse the dust from his legs. When I wrapped him in the towel, he sighed deeply and rested his head against my arm. I brushed him slowly until the sun dipped low and shadows stretched long across the yard. That week, we took in 3 new dogs from a hoarding case. They were small, Chihuahuas or some mix of toy breeds, terrified. They huddled together in a corner of the intake space, shaking even when no one approached. I named them Lottie, Pippa, and Beans. They were too scared to eat at first, so I sat nearby during meals, humming softly. Molly took the lead, walking in and sitting a few feet from them, not watching directly, just existing nearby. That seemed to help. After a few days, they started nibbling. Lottie was the first to approach me, nose twitching. Pippa followed. Beans stayed back the longest, but eventually he crept close, and I felt the brush of his tiny paw against my leg. Chance didn't meet them all at once. I carried him in a few days later and sat down near the pen. The 3 froze when they saw him, but didn't run. They watched. The room went quiet except for the sound of breathing and the occasional drip of the water bowl. And slowly, each one came forward, just enough to sniff the air between them and him. It was all they needed, a nod of welcome. A message passed in stillness. A local teacher reached out around that time, asking if she could bring her high school class by for a volunteer day. They were studying animal behavior and wanted hands-on experience. I hesitated. The idea of that many people in the space felt overwhelming, but I said yes. They arrived on a Thursday morning, 12 kids, half of them trying to hide behind hoodies and earbuds, the other half brimming with questions. We walked through the property. I showed them how to change bedding, clean bowls, label meds. Molly followed us, tail wagging. Finch tried to show off, running laps around the yard. Chance watched from the porch, swaddled in his blanket. "Is that the famous one?" one student asked. "That's him," I said. They gathered quietly near him, unsure whether to approach. One girl knelt down and held out her hand. "Can I pet him?" Chance leaned his head forward, resting his chin in her palm. The kids stayed for hours. At the end of the day, they left handwritten notes behind. One said, "I didn't know what peace felt like until I sat next to that dog." I kept that one pinned beside the kitchen sink. The following week, we had our first sleepover foster event, an idea I'd borrowed from a larger shelter. Families signed up to host a dog for a weekend, giving them time away from the chaos of the group, a chance to learn how they adjusted to a home setting. Sophie went first, paired with a retired librarian named Claire, who sent me updates every 2 hours. Sophie had learned to climb the stairs. Sophie had found the sunniest spot on the couch. Sophie had curled into her lap and fallen asleep. Claire returned her with tears in her eyes and adopted her on the spot. Chance seemed to smile when I told him. As May approached, the air turned humid, heavy with approaching storms. We set up fans in every room, kept water bowls full to the brim, and began preparing the yard for summer. New fencing, more shade, an expanded play space. The book's paperback edition had just been announced. Helen called to say the publisher wanted to feature Chance on the cover again, this time with a group shot of the other dogs behind him. We scheduled a photo shoot in the yard with a local photographer who specialized in animals. The day of the shoot, we lined everyone up near the maple tree. Molly sat front and center. Finch barked once, then stopped when I gave him the look. Pippa stood between Lottie and Beans, barely taller than the grass. Murphy snored under a folding chair, and in the middle, wrapped in his blanket, was Chance. The photographer took 100 shots, trying to catch one moment where everyone looked the same direction. It didn't matter if they didn't. The beauty was in the chaos, the personalities, the life. I sat beside Chance as the camera clicked. "Look at what you made," I whispered. He looked up at me and blinked slowly. In late May, a man arrived unannounced. He was in his 40s, wiry, with nervous hands and kind eyes. He said he'd read the book and driven 4 hours just to see if he could volunteer. He didn't need a place to stay, didn't want anything in return. "I used to be a mess," he told me. "Then someone gave me a dog. That dog saved my life. I want to pay it forward." His name was Jason. He came every weekend after that. Quiet, consistent, good with the nervous ones. The dogs trusted him quickly. So did I. One evening, we sat on the porch while Chance slept beside us. "I don't know how you do this every day," Jason said. "Because I remember what it's like not to." He nodded. "This place feels like something sacred." Because it is. The days blurred after that. There were adoptions, new arrivals, calls from shelters. One dog, a deaf Great Dane named Ivy, arrived trembling and left 6 weeks later with a family who learned to sign simple commands just for her. Another, a terrier named Gus, came with a broken leg and a biting habit, and left as a therapy companion for a boy with anxiety. I kept a journal of them all, their names, their quirks, their turning points. Chance stayed near, always. If I was filling food bowls, he was in the doorway. If I was brushing someone, he was watching. If I was sitting quietly at the end of the day, he was curled beside me. Sometimes I caught myself talking to him without thinking. Should we accept this new intake? You think Pippa's ready to meet a new family? I miss Nellie today. He never answered. But somehow, I always knew what he would have said. The end of May brought another storm. This one came with hail and sharp wind. The dogs huddled inside, noses pressed to the window. I sat on the floor with Chance wrapped in a towel, the storm flickering light across the room. The power flickered once, then steadied. You remember the first storm we sat through together? I asked. He blinked. You couldn't even lift your head back then. Now look at you, the heart of this whole thing. He shifted slightly, just enough to press his nose against my knee. I stayed there until the thunder stopped. And even after that, long into the night, I stayed. Not because I had to, but because there was no place in the world I would have rather been. June opened with a sunrise so soft and golden, it felt like the world was holding its breath. The kind of morning where even the birds hesitated, where the breeze smelled of clover and memory. I woke early, before the alarm, before the dogs stirred. The house was still. Only the creak of the floorboards reminded me that time was moving, whether I noticed or not. I walked to the kitchen, brewed a cup of tea, and glanced toward the living room. Chance was already awake. He didn't lift his head, but his eyes met mine from across the room. I set my tea down and walked to him, kneeling beside his bed. Hey, buddy. He blinked once, slowly, the way he always did. The blanket draped over him had slipped slightly, so I tucked it gently around his shoulders and ran my hand down his side. His breath was shallow but steady. He hadn't eaten much the day before. The vet had said this would happen eventually, that his body would slow before his spirit did. Still, I kept hoping for another bounce back. Another day like last week, when he'd actually stood on his own and wandered halfway across the yard before curling up under the maple tree. That day had felt like a miracle. Today didn't. The other dogs began to wake. First Finch, bounding from the hallway like he'd never known a moment of doubt in his life. Then Molly, slower and more composed. Lottie barked from the far corner, and Beans responded with a sharp yip. The house filled with motion, footsteps, tails, water lapping, the soft thud of toys hitting walls. Life. I fed them all, checked meds, opened the back door. Finch raced outside, Molly at his heels. The others followed. I glanced back to where Chance still lay, unmoving but watching. "Want to go out?" I asked. I didn't expect an answer, but he shifted slightly, one paw stretching forward. I carried him to the porch, wrapped gently in his blanket. He didn't protest. His head rested against my arm, eyes half closed. I set him down near the edge of the steps, where the sun had just reached the floorboards. He sat for a while like that, breathing in the morning, watching the others explore the yard. Molly approached slowly and lay beside him, her shoulder touching his. Finch darted past, then stopped, circled back, and nudged Chance's nose gently before running off again. I sat on the steps and watched them all, the way you watch something you love just being itself, doing nothing and everything all at once. Around mid-morning, Jason arrived. He brought coffee and a box of supplies from the shelter. We spent a few hours cleaning kennels, refilling storage bins, assembling a new outdoor pen in the side yard. Jason worked with quiet purpose, glancing now and then toward the porch where Chance remained, Molly still beside him like a sentinel. "He's quieter today," Jason said, brushing his hands on his jeans. "Yeah, he's tired." We didn't say anything more. We didn't need to. Later that afternoon, I sat inside writing updates for the adoption page. Murphy had found a home with a retired couple in town. Lottie and Beans had bonded with a woman who taught yoga and promised they'd have their own spot on the mat. Sophie's latest photo showed her lying in a sunbeam with a stuffed elephant tucked under her chin. I heard the front door creak. I turned. Jason stood there, still, one hand on the frame. He looked at me, then at the floor. "I think you should come out here." My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. I already knew. I walked to the porch slowly. Chance hadn't moved. Molly was still beside him, her nose pressed to his side. Jason stepped aside. I knelt down. He was gone. Not violently, not suddenly. Just gone. Like a breath that had never come back. I placed my hand on his chest, hoping for something I knew wasn't there. The blanket was still warm. Molly lifted her head and looked at me. Not with confusion, not with fear, just a soft, quiet understanding. I leaned over and pressed my forehead to Chance's shoulder. The tears didn't come right away. They waited. They gave me space. I carried him inside, wrapped gently, as I had so many times before. I laid him in the recovery room, on the cot closest to the window, where the light poured in like gold. The others gathered quietly, one by one. They didn't bark, they didn't pace. They just came, noses low, tails still. Finch lay down a few feet away. Even Boots, who hadn't been back for long, sat silently at the threshold. The house remained that way for hours. No one asked for dinner. No one played. Eventually, the sun dipped low. I lit a candle beside Chance and whispered the words I'd written years ago in that first notebook. "You are loved. You are safe. You are home." Jason stayed late. He didn't talk much. We sat in the kitchen sipping tea, listening to the soft rustle of the wind outside. "He was ready," Jason said. "I know. Still hurts." "Yeah." That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked the halls, checked on every dog, refilled water bowls that didn't need refilling. When I passed the recovery room, I stopped in the doorway. The candle still burned. I knelt beside Chance one last time, resting my head on the cot beside his. "Thank you," I whispered, "for everything." In the morning, I called Helen. She offered to handle all the logistics. I didn't have to worry about anything. A local artist donated a small plaque to hang above the fireplace. It read, "The dog who saved us all." We held a small memorial in the yard 2 days later. Volunteers, adopters, neighbors, people brought stories, photos, drawings from children who'd met him at events. One woman, who'd only visited once, said, "He made me feel like I belonged somewhere, just with a look." We planted a tree beside the maple, a young redbud, soft pink blossoms just beginning to form. Molly sat beside it the entire time. That evening, I sat in the quiet house with a dozen candles lit. The dogs were calm. Jason had gone home. The wind moved through the open windows, and I could still hear the echo of Chance's sighs in the corners of the room. I opened the notebook I kept beside my bed and turned to a fresh page. He left behind a world, not just a memory, a legacy of second chances, and a reminder that even the most broken among us can be the source of healing for others. June moved on. The grass grew higher. New dogs arrived. Arthur returned for a visit. Elena sent photos of Boots in a hammock. Finch lost his first tooth. The house remained full of noise, of fur, of light, and of chance. Because even in his absence, he was everywhere. In the way Molly waited at the door. In the way the new dogs stopped barking when they stepped into the house. In the way I moved through each day with a slower breath and a fuller heart. He'd been called too sick to save, but he had saved us all.